Joining us right now to talk about this is Meghan Hays, Democratic strategist, former White House director of message planning under President Biden, and Pete Seat, former spokesman in the George W. Bush White House. It's great to see you guys. Pete, it's great to have you here in person. Meghan, I wish you were here as well. Hours after he takes office, these people can expect executive actions to take. One side note, Trump and Republicans have both criticized and Biden for using and not using executive actions when it comes to immigration. I digress. But these big sweeps of American cities and much more. Campaign promise made, campaign promise kept?
Absolutely. Campaign promise made and kept. He ran on immigration. He is a hardliner on this topic and securing our border and making sure that we tackle the scourge of illegal immigration in this country. And Donald Trump has said, you know, a lot of people think it's bluster and bluff when he says, I'm going to act on day one. It sounds like he's going to act on day one. And Tom Homan has been saying the same thing ever since he was tapped to lead ICE in this Trump administration. He has said on day one, 12:01 p.m., expect action to be taken. And a lot of action needs to be taken because Joe Biden signed, I think it was 94 or 96 executive orders in his first 100 days to scrap what Trump had done and what was working. So they're probably going to have to reverse a lot of that.
Yeah, we'll get to the back and forth of executive order scrapping in just a second. Meghan, how do Democrats want a secure southern border as well. How do Democrats respond to this, react to these moves, and in their view, make sure it doesn't go too far? Because you know that Kamala Harris, during the campaign, definitely moved to take a more aggressive approach on immigration as part of the campaign. This gets to this debate that's important and interesting amongst Democrats, which is, should they be the resistance or should they learn to coexist with Republicans and Trump this time?
Look, I think they're going to have to take a middle road here, right? We're going to have to coexist, but we also have to make sure that we're doing things that the American people want that also are constitutionally correct and appropriate. So I think that, you know, the two-pronged approach here is having a secure border with a legal citizenship or a pathway to citizenship. But I think that some of these actions that he wants to take on day one, he's not going to want to have some of the optics of mass deportations and separating families here. So I think that where we will see some actions being taken from Trump, it will not be as extreme as he was when he was campaigning. Again, campaigning is different than governing, and I think this is one of those issues where they're going to figure out that governing is going to be much more challenging than the campaign.
And they also, you would think, Pete, have learned the lesson of when you put in place a policy without thinking of how quickly how the fallout will lay with the first, you know, with the first travel ban that they put in place. I mean, the optics of that was horrendous.
Well, I would say it would be smart to set expectations. Almost anything the government does, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat, can be a little messy at times. Mm-hmm. And if it's...
Well, actually, I guess a good point. Do you think they're setting expectations too high for what they're going to be able to pull off?
Yeah, and I think that is a hallmark of Donald Trump. He loves to set high expectations. He will move the goalposts if he needs to declare victory. But the prudent move on this, I think, would be to lay the expectations out and say, hey, this isn't going to be quick and it's not going to be easy.
There's also, Meghan, been a lot written about how much Joe Biden is doing in these final days to, I'll just say, box Trump in potentially. I mean, you've got the commutations, the list that was just announced this morning, bans on oil and gas drilling in the final moments, extending temporary protected status to nearly 1 million immigrants, removing Cuba from the state sponsor of terror list. What do you think Joe Biden is doing, and what do you think it does to Donald Trump?
Look, I think Donald Trump has a very smart team behind him, or they are going to try to figure out how to get out of some of these different things. But this is President Biden's right. He is president until January 20th at 11:59, and he is able to do what he wants to do. And some of these were policies that he wanted to do when he ran for president. So I don't begrudge him for actually following through to the very last day and running through the tape, as they like to say over there at the White House. So I don't begrudge him for doing any of that. And Donald Trump will have to figure out if it's worth the optics of getting out of some of these things that the American people actually did want.
What do you think, Pete, on this one?
I'm not all that surprised that a lot of presidents do this on their way out the door.
All presidents do this on their way out the door. It's been noted that what Biden has done has been unusually, has been more. You know, it's been an unusual flurry of executive
It is certainly a flurry, and unique and unprecedented in ways. Hunter Biden, we can put that aside. But the sense that I've gotten just watching Joe Biden in these final weeks is this is not someone who is at peace with his legacy and the way his presidency is ending. And I think some of these decisions are maybe Hail Marys to leave some kind of legacy that is more positive than it has been up to this point. And even the fact that he's only done a couple of interviews on the way out. Only one television interview last night, only one print interview with USA Today. Usually a president would be doing a flurry of interviews in addition to those executive orders.
Meghan, that actually, the legacy question is one that gets exactly to the agreement or non-agreement on how well they have worked together when it comes to the Israel-Hamas hostage and ceasefire deal. Biden sitting down in this final interview that he did just last night, and Trump sitting down for a radio interview. They're just like at odds on who should get the credit now. Look at this.
I told him what I was doing, what I thought could happen. But what we did, we brought in the people, or going to be his national security people. We brought them in closer to tell them what was happening as we hand this off.
It was so ungracious of Biden to say, oh, he did it. He didn't do anything. If I didn't do this, if we didn't get involved, the hostages would never be out. They would have never come out.
Why can't they, do you think, just say we worked on this together, as their staff seem to be very capable of saying that we've brought it in and we've worked in coordination? Does this get to the question of legacy for Joe Biden?
No, I mean, also to Pete's earlier point, you can't judge a legacy here in just the last couple of days of what he's doing. He's had 50 years of public service, so his legacy will be long past some of these executive actions that he's doing in the last couple of days. On the issue of the ceasefire, I do think that Joe Biden is being more gracious to Donald Trump and giving them credit, saying they were being brought in. But the fact of the matter is this was their framework from May, as the president announced. So they should get the lion's share of the credit. They've been over there trying to deal with this negotiation, but also Donald Trump's team was impactful here. And so they can split credit. I'm not sure that these two men can figure out how to do that. I think there's some other things at play here, but I do think that both of these teams deserve credit to get these hostages home.
Yeah, teams versus the two men at the top. Those are two different men. Yeah, these two men, they're not going to say it. They're teams, though, saying, we got this done. Great to see you guys. Thank you very much.